Welcome, Stephen. Hello. Nice to see you again. It's been a little while since we got together, and obviously we did some work for you with sort of 24 months, 2 years, 2.5 years ago now. And so, how have you been since then? How are things, and how's the world of actuaries at the moment?
Well, we're in good shape, James. And when we worked together a couple of years ago, that we were having to navigate the post-COVID landscape, and we were looking in particular at our event strategy. We'd previously had a model where much of it was in person, with a good level online. Obviously, the in-person stuff fell away overnight.
Yes.
And we had to look at how that model might move moving forward. So yeah, it's been a couple of years since then. We're now in year 4 of our 5-year strategy.
Yep.
The strategy was developed in 2019, 2020, and it was designed to sort of reposition the profession, transform IFOA, ensure that our members felt part of a vibrant global community, and that we offered a range of services that were highly valued. So I'm sort of paraphrasing it, and so on. I think what was interesting, perhaps with the benefit of hindsight, is that everybody says that sort of everybody has a plan until they get punched on the nose, to misquote Mike Tyson. But I think what has been interesting for us is that the strategy that had been developed pre-COVID actually survived that, and actually, while I'm not at all suggesting that it was an opportunity, but it did enable us to accelerate much of that path. So here we are in 2023. The organisation's in robust good health, certainly financially. All our systems are close to being changed. It's been a major exercise with that. We've been looking at our education and learning programs, and we're very excited about where that will go. We had to move those online very rapidly in April 2020, and we've been working hard on good engagement and culture with our colleagues. So I think we're in good shape. We turn to the next 5-year strategy, which will be developed in 2024-25. But I think over the past sort of 6 to 12 months, we've already begun to think about some of the areas which probably won't be hugely new. But I think what we will be doing is slightly sharpening our focus in a couple of areas, in particular about how we look to grow and develop the profession worldwide, and a recognition that our council clarified last year, that we are a global professional body rooted in our UK heritage. And I know some of the questions you want to talk about later about Chartered and our status and our brand, but I think we've changed a lot in the last 10 to 15 years. The membership's virtually doubled. We now have over half of our membership outside the UK. And I think we've been wrestling a little bit with, well, what's our status and what is our positioning? And I think the feedback that we got from council last year, and again confirmed earlier, is that being a global professional body rooted in our UK heritage is our sort of branding that we want to try and take forward. But you know, it's going well. Good,
good. So just taking you back a step or two, your background, legal background originally, sort of what took you, what was the path that took you to the sort of the CEO of a membership organisation?
Well, it's highly circuitous and with a nice mix of happenstance and good luck. So I qualified as a lawyer. I worked in the city in a new area called financial services and corporate work. That'll show my age there. And I got headhunted to join Norwich Union, which is now part of Aviva, to work on its demutualisation. It was also a time where lots of things were going on in the insurance sector. There was lots of mis-selling issues that required redressing, and I was very fortunate to have the clear sponsorship of a number of senior actuaries at Aviva, and they gave me plenty of opportunities. And very rapidly in that role, I was getting involved in transformation boards, operating committees, and so on. And after a number of years, I ended up really doing less and less legal work, and got asked to look at a lot of capital and transformational and mergers and acquisition work. And ended up handing over my legal hat and becoming strategy director with Aviva UK business,
Right.
and after some time, I was then put in charge of change portfolio. We spent, gosh, it would have been several £100 million a year on projects, mainly IT, but transformational ones, and ended up being UK board director for a number of years there. And then when I left that, I became CEO for Midsize Mutual, operating in the affinity space, which was a very enjoyable role. And in a strange way, when I was looking what I wanted to do next, a number of things sort of came together, which was I've always enjoyed and looked for some form of purpose in the nature of the job that I'd had. And what I loved about working at Aviva and at Police Mutual is that you could do all the technical financial services work, but actually what you could see is the impact that we had on real people. And one of the things that made it, I think, an easy choice about the membership sector was that, having been involved with delivering a sort of major outcomes, that having the opportunity to help shape, oversee the profession and support it in other ways that enable it to meet its public interest remit was something that was quite rewarding. I also, you might have guessed from my career, I always like to go somewhere that's interesting and a bit new.
Yes.
So I felt there was enough that was familiar.
Yes.
But also enough that was going to be new. But ultimately, it was the opportunity to try and support the actuarial profession, which had been very kind to me. A number of the key individuals throughout my career were major influences on some of the decisions that I took.
Yes.
Hugely supportive. But it enabled me to think a little bit about how my eye, using the skills that I've got, sort of rooted in technical work, transformational work, strategy, to try and help this next phase of development, and for the actuarial community to be a more influential, a more valued one by its stakeholders, but also by its membership as well.
Yes. So, I mean, the sort of level, how would you sort of quantify the level of importance of sort of having that experience, the actuarial experience, or working with actuaries when you were in your various roles, that you brought into your role now? What sort of level of importance do you put on that? The reason I'm asking is, I mean, there is a real mixture of CEOs that I work with out there in the sector. Some who have, you know, direct experience, and it's insisted upon by various boards, etc., that they work with, that they have that experience. Do you think that's an absolute necessity when you joined, or was it just purely an advantage, essentially, in your role?
And I think it is quite firm specific, actually, James, which is it depends where they are in the cycle. That if you, for example, a membership body, and the emphasis of your next couple of years of strategies around technical exams and those sorts of things, then you might want to have a CEO who's very familiar, very close to all of those sorts of things.
Yes.
For me, the pitch for IFOA, which was an organisation that needed strategic transformational skills, and that's what I do. That's what my background is. Much of our underlying infrastructure needed development to change, the culture needed changing, and the strategy needed delivering. And that was sort of, they needed a CEO that met that moment. I think it was definitely an advantage that I've worked for actuaries. I've had a large number of actuaries work for me. And I think the advantage I have is that I have some form of regulatory and technical experience and a good track record in financial services. So I think that's definitely an advantage, but it was an advantage for what IFOA needed then.
Yes.
I think different stages in a different model, it would need some different skills.
Yes.
And I think that would be true. So I think it is very situational, James.
Right.
I don't think it's always necessary to have deep sectoral professional knowledge.
Yes.
If what the organisation needs is something different.
Yes.
I think the other thing I would flag is that the organisation has changed a lot in recent years. So one of the things that we often wrestle with is that IFOA and a lot of other membership bodies are now multi-million-pound organisations.
Yes.
And back in the day, it might be possible to get most of the skill sets that's required to run small organisations from a small group of people and rely on volunteers. But if I look at my executive now, the skill set that they bring is specialist. And obviously they need to have not just some understanding of the actual profession, they need to have a strong affinity with it.
Yes.
But actually they don't need any more than that, because if you're looking to oversee a progressive set of learning and change standards, you need somebody who's good at that. Yes. Regardless of whether or not they understand the actual, you need someone who's an educational specialist.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you need, if you're looking at developing our brand, our proposition, primarily need somebody who's good at that, James. So where we are is that we're primarily focusing on the skill sets that's required to be a good executive and to run a multi-million-pound organisation, as opposed to necessarily are they actuaries or do they have a deep understanding of the sector. They need, some of those roles do need to have a good understanding of that. You can't go out and speak to major employers unless you understand how it works. However, the skills that you really need are to be good at relationship management.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolute sense. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think it's that just that, I suppose what irks me and quite a lot of other people in the sector is sometimes is this kind of very much intransigent view that some organisations have out there, which is that we must have somebody who's experienced in X and they must have come from X. And that usually leads to, well, and therefore, but don't necessarily have the experience of leading organisations. And that can lead to all sorts of issues, I think, from an organisational point of view. So that's kind of where I was heading with that. And I think it's kind of, as you said, it is a little bit, without sort of using a sort of overused expression, but it is horses for courses in these circumstances quite often, especially, as you said, with the transformational piece, which, let's face it, many organisations need to go through that, membership organisations need to go on a regular basis.
And it's difficult. Any CEO has to be credible enough, and I certainly have a deep respect for the work that actuaries do. But actually, what IFOA really needs is to deliver its strategy. It needs someone who can articulate that, put it into plans, is capable and credible enough to be good at stakeholder management, and wily enough to get the organisation to get stuff done, because that's hard. Now, clearly, I think in a perfect world, it would be lovely if somebody was an actuary and able to do all that as well. And there are great actuaries that can do that as well. But I don't think it's a prerequisite for doing the job. I think I have had an advantage of having a technical background. That does mean that I can talk to some of the technical issues in a way that I would hope would be regarded credibly. But I don't always think it's necessary for what an organisation needs. And I think one of the challenges we've had in Nittel, and I'm sure many others have, is a recognition that the organisation is a professional body and needs to be run by a professional executive. That's not at the expense of the member voice, clearly. But actually, you do need professionals to run a body of that scale.
Yes, absolutely. So talk, and this is a question I ask most CEOs that I come across. So talk me through your first 6 months. How did that pan out? What were your priorities? So are you a believer in this sort of 3 months, three months plus 3 months scenario of listen in the first 3 months and act in the second 3 months? How did you what's your approach?
Well, it was. I'm not a big fan of the first 90 days or 100 days stuff. I think I've inherited a number of jobs in my past where people have gone in and they have a playbook about kicking off a strategic review, some form of crisis gets engineered that demonstrates how fantastic they are. They kick off a major transformation program, do a restructure, and then declare victory. And you can't, that's a nonsense. But personally, for other people it works. Now, that's not to say that you don't go in and you don't want to make an impact, and the importance of choosing your battles carefully to put some markers down. I had the benefit ahead of starting of knowing that I had 2 months because of our corporate year of getting the plan written up. So I actually had started doing that before I joined. And what was evident is that there'd been a lot of work on strategy, but it actually hadn't been put into a plan, James.
Yes.
So, it's one of the truths of strategy. People think just because you've discussed it, it's going to happen. No, it needs to be put into an actual plan. So before I joined, I literally had about 6 weeks to get the plan written up and agreed by council and the management board. And there were a couple of things that I did to put a few markers down. You are very clear about sort of the tone, which is, that papers need to be in on time and to good quality. I think it looks sloppy and ill-disciplined if they're late. And a lot of those sorts of things are about just establishing some basics. There's a bit about being candid about where the organisation is, what you've been brought in to do. I also was very clear with the existing executive, which is it's a clean slate. And there are some things that are non-negotiable because that's what I've been brought in to do. Will you work with me to help deliver it? And I would like to sort of place on the record that that any change of CEO is difficult, particularly when they've been brought in to deliver change. The existing team are thinking, yikes, what does that mean for me? And we work very hard to sort of say an appropriate farewell to what had happened before me, but also they very much embrace this is a new start. And we can do that. And so that was sort of my initial plan. I would say that what then happened in the middle of March 2020 slightly threw that up in the air. I can remember someone bursting into a meeting room in IFOA's office as saying the country's about to be shut down. And with that, I packed my bag and I didn't return to the office for several months. And that created a huge amount of different issues, actually, James. I mean, one you assisted us with ultimately, which was overnight we lost quite a significant amount of of in-person event income. We had to pivot very rapidly to online exams. We had literally posted all the papers to British Council venues across the world for our exams to be sat 3 or 4 weeks later. One of the interesting things about strategy is it helps to be lucky. We had literally 2 or 3 weeks earlier just done a big business continuity event, and it showed that we could run remotely. But we then obviously had to adapt to running remotely. So actually we had to pivot very quickly. We did a number of very obvious things. Like I did daily messages to the team. We did regular town halls, keeping people engaged. We dialed up lots of wellbeing stuff. And actually it enabled me to make some very strong cultural statements that I felt were needed. And one of those was, we're going to trust what you do, work when you can, and I think there had been quite a sort of command and control previous culture. And I can understand, and that's not to criticize it, but in my own mind, if you're looking to create an organization that's going to learn and grow and develop to support a strategy that requires it to learn and grow and develop, actually if it's command and control, that's just not going to happen. So in a strange way, we were gifted the opportunity to have to shift culture. And it knocked out a lot of this presenteeism stuff, and it forced many of us to just say it doesn't matter when you send stuff, you don't have to respond to it immediately. Let's just focus on outcomes rather than how you got there. And almost immediately you could see the organisation begin to flick. So we had some quite acute financial issues to consider. We had to address the risk and the loss of income. And we took some bold decisions, actually, with hindsight. I cancelled pay reviews and bonuses that had already been awarded. And I went out to people and said that we weren't going to make people redundant as a consequence of COVID, which was quite brave at the time. But the trade-off is that we're going to save money by not unraveling the pay awards you just got. And what was interesting is we lost one person who was unhappy at losing a bonus, but actually what it also created was a huge sense of we're all in this together. And probably those 2 or 3 things and the big cultural dimensions that came with that enabled us to really accelerate it. It created some slightly different challenges a bit further down the line. That ironically, when you have a crisis, although I've said command and control was what we didn't want, by definition, it did require sort of a lot of war room type sort of stuff. Yes. And as the organisation stabilised over the next couple of months, we then had to almost unwork a lot of the things that we'd done to make it more empowering, more ownership related. But it wasn't quite the start that I'd envisaged. But in a strange way, that we adapt. What I'm proud about the team is, with good support from the board, we adapted very well to a huge change in circumstances, and it enabled us to accelerate, particularly some of the cultural transformation that I felt was necessary, and it created a degree of trust that I think perhaps might not have happened without that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, and I've covered this off with other people that in recent time, that sort of, I mean, I wouldn't say we've moved on from it, because we haven't. We're still in I still regard us in a transition period from the pandemic. The hybrid working piece, I mean, it's conjured up some issues for organisations, I think, both in membership and outside, in terms of that office environment, which is now sort of missing to a certain extent, in terms of, especially sort of with younger workers, essentially, and how they build, you know, that rapport that they build with colleagues and peers, is now kind of missing. Have you sort of thought through that? Have you any means to address that?
Yeah, and look, I'm not professing that we know all the answers yet, James. We have committed to hybrid working. We have office accommodation that we have adapted to make it more of a hub collaborative working style.
Right.
We haven't imposed a set minimum of time that people should spend. What we simply said, because we trust people, is come in when the work's required. Right. And the other stuff is that I've seen lots of organisations saying you need to be in for this amount of time. And I think unless you can say why, you just look a bit stupid. Yes. And most organisations can't answer the why question. So what we have done is be more specific about why we want people to come into these collaborative hubs. And what we are seeing is that there are certain groups that are using it very regularly, that other teams are coming together formally once a month offsite to talk about strategy and those sorts of things. So it's not laissez-faire. We're encouraging it and we're filtering it, but equally we don't want to go into a situation where we simply say you have to be in 4 to 5 days a week, because I think what we do know is that people have really valued the flexibility and the trust that's come with it. Yeah. And we want to have a thoughtful way of doing it. The areas that we are thinking hard about is how do we create the right sort of culture. It was actually quite easy in those early days I've just described, James, because the teams were quite established and a lot of people knew each other. You know, around about a third of our organisation is new since 2021, and we've had to look at our induction process to make sure that works effectively. We do hold single IFOA events where everybody flies in across the world and we spend a day and a half together. You'll be pleased to know they're not given 8 hours in a dark room on strategy. You know, a lot of it's just about seeing them, feeling the organisation and building that connection. So I think I'm not saying it's perfect, but we are adapting to it. I think we're doing it thoughtfully. If I were to look ahead, it would be how do we create that optimum culture and that performance culture in a hybrid way of working. Yes. What we're acutely aware is to avoid what I'll call continuity COVID, where we've adopted something that worked well in a crisis and we just let it spin. We're going to have to be very conscious about what does optimal hybrid working mean. And I think there is a great sweet spot to be had. I think we're taking the right things, but I don't think I've not met an organisation who's quite got it right yet. And I think it will evolve and adapt and move on.
Yeah, fair enough. I just sort of moving things slightly to one side in terms of talking about the membership a bit more. And one of the key things I see in membership organisations is, and then one of the key questions I always ask is how well do you know your membership? And it's a very open question, and it's meant to be. And I get various answers from people. And my fear is always the answer of, well, we do a membership survey once a year, and that's when I get really fearful about the direction of the organisation and where it's going. What sort of strides have you made towards understanding your membership and building that kind of membership engagement piece?
We've done some quite thoughtful work, and we've done way back in 2020 some development of propositions for different membership groups, and that's been good, but it has a somewhat of a fatal flaw, which is it assumes that member needs are determined by their qualification status, where in fact actually it's much deeper than that. So we've done some work to try and determine what we call need states, and it's based on treating people as individuals and trying to understand what's important to them individually, and we've got about 12 or 13 different need states. And there's a cluster that you can which we are building most of our services and messaging around, right. And it is mapped against different segments and different groups, but it also recognizes that people will have different need states at different times. There will be some people where progressing their career is really important, and they will need different things from us. Yes. There will be others who are very passionate about the standards that actuaries operate to. And what will make them very jumpy is anything that's seen to dilute that in a way, but anything that sort of is talking about standards and structure and discipline and so on is quite interesting. So I'll just use that one as an example. If you've got a member where the most important thing is the level of pride they have in being an actuary, and actually the thing that will really disorientate them is if they feel that standard slipping. Yes. So we never really used to talk too much about disciplining and regulation, not because we're embarrassed by it, but just sort of something that you never really talked about a great deal. And of course, we're not going to talk about it hugely, but I think it's quite a good thing that we discipline people. I mean, hopefully not too many. And what we found is that for the people who are really passionate about our standards and reputation, actually telling them that our exam pass rates are operating at these levels because they're hard exams. Yes. Telling them that people who fall short of the high standards do get disciplined. Yes. Actually, that's really interesting because they'd be worried about that, and we're now saying, don't worry, you can relax about this stuff. So the whole need states is quite a thoughtful thing about what is it that triggers many people's emotions. So that's under work that's helping a lot of our messaging. The other thing on the proposition stuff is that we've now got it very clearly defined, and in many ways it sounds quite underbaked, but and that's not to patronize or diminish it, but actually many of our members' needs are actually quite straightforward, which is they want to have good frictionless service with us. They want to feel that we offer good value for money. They want to feel that standards are maintained. They want to know that we have a brand and a public interest message that makes them feel good about the profession. Yes. And so when I describe it as simply as that, there's a real temptation to think that we must be doing something. We need to be doing something that's hugely transformational. And those are important. I'm not looking to diminish that. No. But for the majority of our members, their needs are actually really quite simple, which is they want us to be easy to do business with, good value for money. They want to feel that they're part of a wider community and supported in their careers, and that IFOA is helping the membership have a voice at on the big issues. And I think the charm of that is those things are very simple, and I can then put them into an actionable plan, James. Yes. I think so we never quite know members enough, but I think we've got some good frameworks there. The other thing I would add that we have done is that while these aren't members per se, that we have developed strong relationships with key employers,
Yes.
because obviously those employers are able to see sort of the changes that are coming down the pathway.
Yeah.
They're attracting, recruiting, engaging, retaining people. And I think it's one of those ones that was a bit of an act of faith to say we need to strengthen these relationships. But actually, we now have a key account management process in place. We have, senior people. We have a head of UK whose sole job is to go and support the key employers in the UK, attract, retain, develop the actuarial community in those firms.
Yes.
So I think that's given us a huge level of insight, James, that we were probably missing a few years ago. So look, I think the thing is everybody is an individual, but there are enough common themes, I think, that we can then take that back to say, how can we try and address those as we move forward? We're on the journey. There's a lot more to be done. I think
it's good to hear that you focus on the intangibles, to be honest with you, because I see too many people focusing on the tangible pieces and not the intangible piece, and you seem to have sort of come on that and looked at that quite carefully and are focusing on that, which is
that's been a challenge, James, internally, I think, because people like to measure the tangibles. And actually, in the nice possible way, if you're simply measuring renewals and member numbers, well, that's a bit pointless, really, because many people have to be members of IFOA, and simply because people renew, the fact that in the UK many fees are paid for employers, those aren't measures of engagement. What you want to know is whether people feel proud to be associated with IFOA, and that's very intangible. But by understanding what are the things that are their trigger points, you can then try and reference back. So it's quite sophisticated, I think, but the proof will be in the pudding as we go forward.
Absolutely. I'm aware that time's ticking away. Yeah. There's two things I'd like to focus in on, if you don't mind. The first one, sort of a question that sort of seems to be playing on lots of people's minds at the moment, is that of internationalisation and how that plays out. And I know that that's quite an important part, as you talked about before, and we've talked about before, and I'm aware that the organisation is going down that route. There are many pitfalls to the process of internationalising your organisations, which I'm more than aware of, having talked to many organisations over the years. What's been your approach, and what do you think the future looks like for the international side of your organisation?
I think some of it has been a reflection of a little bit on the journey that we've had in the past. I think there was one of the challenges that any membership body has is about scale and making sure that the organisation has a viable and resilient scale to support all the things the members want you to do. And actually that requires quite an honest conversation that says, if you want us to change the world, just paraphrasing, and do all these great things, that actually you need to be a decent size. And if you want to have a global influence, you need to be able to afford to do these sorts of things. If you want to be able to have fees that are lower in the long term, you need to have more members. So it's not a criticism, but I think IFOA had grown in recent years simply because it wished to grow without necessarily reconciling some of those things.
Yes.
But if you want to do more, you need to be a bigger organisation. If you want to hold fees flat in the UK, for example, you need to have more members outside the UK. If you want to recognise that many employers, I've just described earlier, global, then you need to be able to be big enough to afford the global support. Our council began to recognise some of these conflicts a little bit when I joined and talked about global influence and member value. And what we've done very recently is sharpen those to say, well, what does that mean specifically? What we've concluded is that we do want to grow, but growth is a consequence of the strategy and having a good proposition. We're not looking to grow just because we need to grow. And I think that's a really thoughtful position, James, which is if we get a compelling proposition, good standards, good value, the right sort of relationships with people feel they want to be members of IFOA, then we'll grow as a consequence of that. And our business plans assume that we will grow very modestly, so we're not banking on growth. I'm not saying it will be accidental, but I think if you have a strategy that says we need to grow by this much, then it's a, you know, without working out how, then it's a poor strategy. I think the other dilemma we've had is, as I touched right at the outset, then how you define what IFOA is. And in the past, we were predominantly a UK organisation, the faculty in Scotland, the Institute in England and Wales. It came together 13, 14 years ago, and we're still predominantly UK centred. And IFOA had a footprint more internationally, where, you know, actually our members would have been involved in places where the UK had strong links. But obviously we've now shifted since then, and I think the key thing, and it's a philosophical debate, but if I paint those two extremes of, are we a UK body where people outside the UK are lucky to be members of, versus one, I'm just paraphrasing, but right to the other extreme, are we a global professional body rooted in that UK heritage? Both of those things have very different consequences about how you run it. And look, we asked council for a steer, and they said it's definitely the latter. Global professional body rooted in the heritage, and that enables us to think about our brand, enables us to think about where our chartered status really helps. We had a vote from our members last year where they agreed that we can introduce the phrase designation chartered before associate and fellow. We think globally the chartered status is an asset for us. Right. So that's a really good example, practically, of taking our UK heritage, which is a chartered body, and then being able to use that to help our global position. And it also helps the profession, we think, because one of the big challenges we have is about new areas, new domains, all those sorts of things. And in some of those cases, what we're finding is that people like what an actuary brings, but they don't always know what an actuary is. No. And being able to lead with the fact that someone is a chartered associate or fellow, but is a benchmark of standards and quality and integrity. And we think in some of these new areas, it may be that people lead, and the use of charter opens the doors and then enables the actuarial skills to follow. Yes. So I'd be fibbing if I said these decisions have always been easy and clear cut and there's lots of nuance, but actually I think settling on that clear statement means that we can now implement it. And I think the challenge we've had is that we've had to recognise the nature of where we are. Yes. And then take a very clear strategic position off the back of it. I think recognising that you can't, you know, that the statement I've just described probably doesn't land for some UK fellows who feel very passionately that we're predominantly UK based. And yes. The flip side of that is that we recognise those concerns too. Yes. So I described earlier the fact that we have a head of UK, because some of our UK fellows probably feel that they've been a bit marginalised at the expense of the UK growth, of the overseas growth in the past. Now that's untrue, yes. But that perception is true. Yes. So we're working hard to try and get that right as well. Does that make sense, James?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I completely understand that. And as I said, it's horses for courses in these situations. But internationalisation is for one organisation is not the same for another. So it's interesting to know what your approach has been. I'm aware that we're just coming towards the end of our time today. The final question, which I think is probably more important to you guys than any other organisation, and that is the one of AI, yeah. and the influence that's having both on you as an organisation, but sort of more broadly on your sector. Could you sort of give me sort of a pretty potted view on this, because we haven't got much time, on that and the effect of it essentially?
Yeah, and some of which, James, we don't quite know at the moment. I mean, I think AI at the moment is a mechanism that enables plausible answers to be given. It doesn't mean that they're correct or that they're actually right. And I think what we are working through are several things. We have a thought leadership series where we're actually going to be consulting with our members in the autumn about the role of AI in actuaries. So what I'm saying here is very much a personal view, is that I think from an examination perspective, I would be surprised if in a couple of years' time that we won't let our students use AI to try and assist them with some of the answers. Yes. We've already been quite progressive. Our exams are open book because guess what? That's what the working environment's like. And if you have an open book philosophy, at some point, if people are using AI to assist their day job, they still need to provide the oversight and the standards. Yes. But at some point, I think that is interesting to look through. I think the other practical things is that AI will just spawn a lot more data, and that is manna for heaven for actuaries. What AI won't do is make sense of it. No. And I think it will add third or fourth or fifth dimensions to areas that actuaries are already looking at. So I think it will require some different skill set. Yeah. I think what we don't know is what that means for jobs more generally. My sense overall is that when you look at industrial revolutions and big seismic changes, that in the totality they create more jobs. Yes. Every time there's been a major cultural or societal change, over time they do. But those jobs will be different jobs. Yes. And we need to make sure that the jobs that are there are ones that actuaries can be in. And I do think the role for trusted oversight, interpretation, won't go away. In fact, I think it will increase the need for it. I think we've seen it in data science that people are now beginning to think about imposing standards around that, around technical quality and integrity, because any fool can be a data scientist actually, but a good data scientist operating those standards, and we will see something evolve with AI too. Yes, I do think firms and organisations will need to rely on actuaries and other professionals to be able to sift through the information that's coming out of AF and work out what is true and what's not. So I do think there's a great opportunity. I think it will open up lots of doors in new industries and new sectors and so on. I think, like many others, and that's the personal view, I'm mindful that it may impact what I'll call some of the lower grade grunty work, but in many ways actuaries and other professions have always shown themselves to be remarkably resilient. Yes. And adaptable, and I think we should have some confidence in the fact that IFO actuaries and others from other professional bodies are trained to be curious, adaptable, and the rest. And it's not like the sectors haven't been subject to major change over 10 to 15 to 20 years time. And I think if we give people the right skill set, the right mindset, then I think they will adapt and evolve and continue to be influential, or perhaps in slightly different ways. Yes,
brilliant. Well, thank you for today, Stephen. That's been extremely useful and helpful and informative. And I hope you haven't found it too arduous this morning.
No, it's been very enjoyable, James, as always. And there's some great questions there. I think all membership bodies are trying to work through the knotty challenges of relevance, scale, internationalization, value for money, and what does it take to stay competitive as a membership body in a world which is changing very rapidly. So they were great questions, and thank you for inviting me to participate in your series.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Stephen.